death drive it's not about survival. It doesn't care about the individual. It's the space maybe of something where the boundaries between people dissolve. And this is why for her it's easier to reconciliate, to even equate love and death drive, because for Freud it's impossible. Okay, you have, and because Freud starts with male, like male human being was driven by sexuality or something like it, and sexuality is reappropriating something to satisfy your need outside of yourself. That's maybe it's simplified, but it's basic model. And with Sabine Spielrein, it's not that there is a subject with desires and who wants to satisfy their needs. It's different. It's not the desire. It's rather something from outside of you that is not in control, that is calling you, maybe like a death drive, doesn't care about you. And it's not about reappropriation of something outside of you. For Freud, then the aggression would be associated more with the death drive, trying to appropriate object outside of you, like female object or something, to satisfy your desire. In Spielrein, and maybe female-centered model would be different. It's not you, then you have desire and you satisfying your desires, like completely different. There is no you, and there is no desire. There is like more process of internal sacrifice, the absence where self dissolves into something bigger than you that doesn't care about you, and that's the death drive. And love here would be the sacrifice, not the desire to satisfy something.
Hey everyone, welcome to this conversation that I had with Dr. Julie Reshe. I've been sitting on this chair for the past maybe 10-15 minutes trying to figure out how to record this introduction to this podcast without being insulting towards Dr. Reshe. And I think you shall find out soon, because she certainly wouldn't appreciate any of the compliments that I want to give her. I already told her that studying her work, reading her book, despite it being about depression, negativity, suffering, nihilism, the utter meaninglessness of life, it was indeed one of the most edifying books I've read in a while. It felt like a warm hug, as I told her. But I don't want to be this evil and keep complimenting her, because I know she will repulse to that internally. But it was such a surreal, almost surreal conversation. I've had a lot of guests on, and of course, my sort of immediate reaction has been extremely positive. But with this guest in particular, it was something even beyond positive. I can't really put words to it, which is extremely paradoxical given the fact that her work is on negative philosophy. As she calls it in her book, she is the guardian of negativity, and that's what she's trying to do in her philosophical project, if you could call it that. And she even admits that essentially all her work is useless. Nonetheless, I have to get through this. I have to get through this introduction, even though I don't know how to properly introduce her. So let's go through the formalities, so to speak. Dr. Julie Reshe is a philosopher, a practicing negative psychoanalyst, and a public intellectual. This is a bit recent for her to do her work more publicly. She is currently a visiting professor at University College Cork and University College Dublin. If that's how that's pronounced, Cork, I believe. Okay. She earned her PhD studying psychoanalysis at the Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts under the supervision of Alenka Zupančič. She is also the author of the book Negative Psychoanalysis for the Living Dead, Philosophical Pessimism and the Death Drive. But more importantly, and I should mention that bit too, above everything, she is, and I'm quoting her verbatim from her website, is a pathetic failure. And that's quite important. As she shall mention and highlight a couple of times in our episode. I should also mention, again, if this is something you want to explore, which again, she said you probably shouldn't explore in the end of the podcast. But if it is, for some reason, something you want to explore, philosophical pessimism, negative psychoanalysis, be it may, I'd also recommend watching or listening to the conversation she had with Peter Rollins, because as you know, I'm heavily influenced by Peter Rollins' thinking, and they both conversed and had a public dialogue, which I thought was marvelous. It was lovely. Having said that, here's my pathetic attempt to have a podcast with Dr. Julie Reshe. Nonetheless, I thoroughly enjoyed it and was really grateful and am really grateful for her time, especially given that, as she admits, that she finds her work useful. Pause. Editor Rahul here. I meant to say useless, not useful. Dr. Reshe would certainly not describe her work as being useful, so it's useless. So the sheer fact that she made time for this podcast, it means a lot to me. Saying all that, here's my conversation with Dr. Julie Reshe. It's interesting. I was telling my mate Ewan, who in fact did send me a question for you, which I'm hoping to ask, for a book about depressive realism and about like death and suffering and nihilism. It's one of the most comforting books I've read in like a long time. It felt like a nice warm hug. So it's quite the paradox for a book about such negativity. I personally had a positive reaction to it.
Don't you dare.
Yeah. Okay, Dr. Reshe. Also, it's pronounced Julie Reshe, right?
It's just shortened from Ukrainian, which is much longer, and I'm not sure. Well, it's the right way for what I know English. My English is when you read it Rish, but it's just shorter version of that. In Ukrainian version, shortened would sound Reshe, but it doesn't matter. I don't actually know what's the right way to pronounce it, and I don't care, to be honest.
Excellent. In the spirit of your book. Excellent. Okay, so obviously, as I was reading the book, a big concept I feel that kind of, I don't know what to call it, revolutionized your thinking, let's say, as an individual, was the Freudian, although you mentioned it's initially introduced by Sabina Spilrin. Is that right? The idea of
Another Russian. Well, I claim that she's Ukrainian, so it's also
the
problematic.
controversial.
Shpirey,
Yeah, interesting. I knew of her not because of any like of Freud, but she worked with Carl Jung, I believe, and
she worked with Jung and she worked with Freud, and she was the one who introduced the concept of a death drive, and it was well known. It was associated with her initially, and then the thread was lost, and now we mostly associate Freud with the concept of a death drive, which is unfair. And if I may, this book is amazing in explaining
excellent.
Sabina Spielrein, the woman and the myth. It's
Oh, thank you for
doing
that.
justice to Sabina Spielrein, restoring her as the one who introduced not only the concept of a death drive, but more importantly, maybe the idea of unconscious structures of psyche, which Jung then takes and kind of elaborates in a bit different direction. I like her versions of both important concepts for psychoanalysis more.
Yeah, excellent. Oh, thank you for that. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. In fact, before reading or like following your work, I had no idea who she was, except, and I'm sorry, it's a bit chauvinistic, except that she had a relationship with, like an intimate relationship with Carl Jung. That's all I knew about her, but I didn't really know any of her intellectual work. So yeah, back to the death drive. How can I articulate this question? It's obviously when I first came across it, I thought the death drive was this sort of drive within us for death, for destruction, or like a kind of like what Ernest Becker would put, but in the other way, that we all have this need to die. But then the more I've studied Jacques' work, Alenka Zupančič's work, who I know influenced you a lot, and then obviously your work, it's more like a drive for being undead, as you would call it. So if I could ask for a neophyte, for a person who isn't read in psychoanalytic theory or literature like yourself, how would you explain the concept of the death drive? And then perhaps you could, if you don't mind, expand on how you radicalized it in your book.
So I really love the concept. I mean, it's one of the few concepts in psychoanalysis that I can tolerate, that I can feel I can use, that I don't hate yet, at least. But in some interpretations, like the way Freud conceptualizes it, is the problem with the Freud and how it changes Freud comprehension of psychoanalysis and of human psyche. Because initially, he only adopted it in his late theory after 1920, and he takes it from Sabina Spielrein like with some combination with Schopenhauer, but it functions as a curse of psychoanalysis because initial Freudian comprehension of a human, it was based on the idea of pleasure principle, a utilitarian comprehension of human being. What we want is pleasure. What we are striving towards is pleasure. And then he changed his mind and he tries to make the concept of a death drive central. He would even claim that this is central, providing multiple comprehensions way of conceptualizing the death drive. But each time, and critics of Freud would say that he keeps coming back to his initial framework. So it's like he exists in contradiction. This is how Sabina Spielrein curses psychoanalysis, with her concept introducing something that is foreign to it. And after this, the practical psychoanalysis practice, which was based on initial comprehension of human psyche, Freudian comprehension of human psyche, we can say positively oriented, wanting be happy, wanting to be alive, or at least like aiming at survival. And this comprehension, you cannot change. You have to change completely everything in psychoanalysis, in Freudian early psychoanalysis, to accept it. And he wasn't able to do it. So it kind of interestingly stumbles upon this concept. And I would, maybe it's not that I radicalize it, maybe I do, but rather I try to come back to initial interpretation of Sabina Spielrein, or at least my reading of her, because this is what she starts with. It's the other way around. If Freud starts with the opposite, she starts with this concept and introduces it. And one of the problems in Freud comprehension, why it doesn't fit into his comprehension of human psyche, because he starts with subject, like a subject isolated, self-enclosed, and is driven by its desires. Even concept of the death drive is problematic because it drives somewhere. It's like desire that belongs to a subject. And it's hard, but quite hard to include the idea of that you want self-destruction or something like a death drive into this initial framework, because like doesn't fit. If you already have the idea of a human being, you include it there. Okay, he included it as unconscious, and consciously we still want, in pursuit of pleasure. It's just unconsciously what is we really driven by is the death drive, but it's still like very weak, quite hard to redefine the initial version of a Freud to actually fit a death drive there as central. For Spielrein, it was different. Well, because I think she still talks with Freud. She uses his terms, and she talks with psychoanalysts, with him. But I think if she wouldn't talk with them, I think she would say something different, something that is more harder to make part of Freudian psychoanalysis, because she starts not with like the main thing for her is the dimension of we, not dimension of individual. It's like intersubjective dimension. This is where she positions the death drive. It's not about survival. It doesn't care about the individual. It's the space maybe of something where the boundaries between people dissolve. And this is why for her it's easier to reconciliate, to even equate love and death drive, because for Freud it's impossible. Okay, and because Freud starts with male human being, was driven by sexuality or something like it, and sexuality is reappropriating something to satisfy your need, outside of yourself. Maybe it's simplified, but it's basic model. And with Sabina Spielrein, it's not that there is a subject with desires and who wants to satisfy their needs. It's different. It's not the desire. It's rather something from outside of you that is not in control, that is calling you, maybe like a death drive, doesn't care about you. And it's not about reappropriation of something outside of you. For Freud, then the aggression would be associated more with the death drive, trying to appropriate object outside of you, like female object or something, to satisfy your desire. In Spielrein, and maybe female-centered model would be different. It's not you, then you have desire and you satisfying your desires, like completely different. There is no you, and there is no desire. There is like more process of internal sacrifice, the absence where self dissolves into something bigger than you that doesn't care about you, and that's the death drive. And love here would be the sacrifice, not the desire to satisfy something, to use something or make something part of yourself, to reappropriate. It's like different dynamics of so Freud takes her concept and makes it his concept, which I like less than her initial version.
So, Dr. Rich, if I could ask a very specific question, is it the social aspect outside of the individual or the subject, apropos the death drive, that differentiates it from a desire for death or non-existence? Pardon me.
Well, the desire for non-existence is can be seen as one of the interesting options how to interpret it. It's not necessarily different from the death drive. It could be seen as one of the ways how one can interpret the death drive. What is valuable for me maybe in Spielrein is that it's for her, it's intersubjective something. She doesn't start with self. In relation to self, it's rather self-negation or the disappearance of self, but also it's not opposite. It's not opposite to maybe generation of self, because self is generated through destruction or something like it, and it's intersubjective. It's where self dissolves, and it's also challenged to general perspective of subject in Western philosophy of subjectivity, self-centered philosophy, which starts with self, the interest of self, the existence of self, the sovereign self, and with existentialism, you need to become authentic self, like very good, successful self, sovereign self. And this perspective, this obsession with self, and not recently, but quite for a while, this kind of orientation when one begins with self, separated from other, was questioned in feminist philosophy, for example. It's not the self is interrelational, it depends on others. It exists in relation with others. It's rather illusionary formation. It's not solid. It's not indestructible, something like this. And her concept, Sabina Spielrein concept of a death drive, captures this better, the intersubjectivity, the illusionary nature of self. And it's a bit different from traditional Western philosophical accent on the need to transcend self, something like it, and improve it, or like boost self-esteem or something like it. It's different orientation. It's not about it. It's more like self is not important. It's different direction even of thinking.
How would this differ from like a very crass version of, let's say, like Eastern philosophy, like Buddhism, or whatnot, which I know Lacan had an interest in too. This idea of, having to sort of let go of the self and let the ego disappear, and the idea that we kind of come into like non-existence. How would what Sabina is articulating, I can't pronounce her surname, what she's articulating different from kind of this Eastern philosophical again, but probably a bit caricatured idea of letting go of the self or ego transcendence, so to speak.
I don't know how it's different from Buddhism because I'm not really into Buddhism enough to judge. But one can say that the concept of a death drive, because it's partially influenced by Schopenhauer too, which Freud admits he's more eagerly talking about Schopenhauer than Spielrein. And one could say that the death drive, therefore, is, and because Schopenhauer is influenced, it's westernized version, one of the first one of Buddhism. And because influencing Freud is the results in the death drive partially from him. We can say that this is also the death drive is kind of Buddhist thing, westernized. And my problem is rather with the westernized Eastern philosophy, precisely Buddhism. And I saw meme a while ago which says, I renounced my ego. Now I'm better than others. Like, for me, this is the version. Okay, renouncing ego. It's still, there is a path. That's Western thing. There is a certain way that you need to do, to improve yourself. And like adopting Buddhism, I think it does. It just makes it a part of itself, so it just doesn't work. I hope that Buddhism is not something that encourages it. I hope it's corrupted version, the Western version, but it captures in a great way what is wrong with it. It's not that there is a call, teaching or answer what human being has to do. Like, we have a task on this earth, and a task is, for example, to renounce your ego. It just doesn't matter, more or less. It's not, when it starts to matter, well, when it's included in a Western philosophy, it works in all this Western framework of psychology. It starts to work in this way. I need to do it, and then I feel superior to others, or I just feel good about myself. I don't think it doesn't matter from Spielrein's perspective. It's not what you have to do. It's just, there is nothing you have to do, rather.
Yeah, in fact, if you don't mind, a bit of a personal comment here. I remember the conversation you had with, I think you were conversing with Catherine Malibu on your YouTube channel, Tom McGavin and Alenka Zupančič. And I remember you telling me that when you were younger, you thought, because you're studying philosophy, well, you said that you would either study philosophy or you would have killed yourself. And then you studied philosophy, and then you thought, oh, okay, I'm better than other people, I'm smarter. And then now you even regret studying philosophy because, as the four of you all concluded the conversation, you said that philosophy is useless. Anyway, I just thought it quite interesting because I can see, I would hate to ask you this, but like, at the end of an interview, I'm not going to ask you this, don't worry. People ask, oh, what's your next project? What's your next book? And I don't know, you kind of viscerally react to that in a repulsive way. I don't want to think about my next project. I thought that was quite interesting. So maybe I've got so many questions because I kind of do want to challenge you a bit on your negative philosophy too. But before I get to that, I promised my mate that I'll ask you this question. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read it verbatim. So he follows your work quite closely, in fact. And I think he just started on your book too. But mostly your lectures and podcasts online. And he would call himself a Kierkegaardian. His name is Ewan. We're like my best mates. And here's the question that he sent for you. He said that, I want to read it verbatim. Does the very concept of negative psychoanalysis presume that there is edifying in embracing one's own negation or in embracing one's own despair, as Kierkegaard says at one point in his book, The Sickness Unto Death? And following from that, would this movement not inevitably lead to simply a deeper, more profound re-entry into the positive, so to speak, through the edifying quality of embracing one's own negativity? The movement of which might perhaps be represented by the concept of salvation. So that was a question by Ewan. And then in other words, I think Peter Rollins did mention this too in like his prelude to the conversation you both had. is there some kind of economical aspect to your negative philosophy whereby, embracing the negative, you kind of, the same way when I read your book, I felt good reading a book about negativity and suffering. Is there that element in your work as a theoretician, but also even in the practice of negative psychoanalysis?
It's the problem with Kierkegaard that it's twofold. And I think there is a problem with everyone, including Peter Rawlings and including me. Unfortunately, I would like to be different, but I don't think it's possible. Like for Kierkegaard, who honestly talks about self-negation, the need to negate, not the need, but like self-negating process. Well, for Kierkegaard, it's still a need. He claims that that's what we have to do. And for him, it's the way of salvation. So there is this first thing that he explores, the self-negation, which he connects to love to just love. And for him is the absurdly the movement to salvation, the despair, the proper way of being desperate. And I would only accept partially, trying not to not as a way of salvation, but just this thing, just like that, not saying what to do. Because with Christianity and any religious doctrines, it's problematic because it serves on one hand as a doctrine, which means telling you, opening up the correct path for you. And this is what I'm trying to avoid. With Peter Rawling, it's interesting because his pyrotechnology, to the extent it can be considered negative theology, it's about death of God, so loss of hope and loss of hope of salvation. But one can easily make a movement into positivity here. Like it's the good thing to do, something like this is what we have to do. And he interesting way of formulating was that what is required is salvation from salvation. And it's funny, like this, is it still salvation if it's salvation from salvation? Well, it's funny, but it's a great challenge and a problem for me. I don't know how to respond to that except for it's funny. So what I'm trying to do, and in Christianity, in Kierkegaard, there are two parts of what they say, what they unfold, what they develop on is the negative movement of self-negation, the description of this, and the movement into positivity, at least in a way of formulating these thoughts of describing it's already positivizing in a way. It sounds as prescriptive in language. It's very hard, maybe impossible, to talk about something and not to be prescriptive, like this is what you have to do, or just describing something without prescription. I'm trying to do it, but I think it might be impossible, especially if you write a book. Like, why are you writing it if you're not prescribing something, or you're not providing useful insights, or you're not answering any question that has to be answered, something like that. So it's impossible to not to do it. And I think it's obviously a lame move, like very for the losers, when a writer and or artist would claim that this is not their fault when something doesn't work. It's the problem with the reader, for example, or with the one who doesn't appreciate the art of an artist. But I would I am this loser who would blame. It's just the different way how you read it. If you read it as prescriptive, then it's your problem, not mine. So it's how people are listening and how people are reading might be the problem for me and Kierkegaard, both of us. Well, for me more, because I think Kierkegaard and Christianity can be read in a different way when it's not prescriptive, when it's just about tragedy and despair. So, and even if I sometimes sound like I am prescriptive, I ask people to think that this is when I'm failing. You don't trust this. This is not what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess, Dr. Rich, what I'm sort of trying to deal with is kind of this ultimate innate paradox that's core to your work. Because, and forgive me if this comes off as being a bit crass, but I kind of see even existence itself is sort of a performative contradiction to your philosophy. Because, and I'm going to fully admit here, I'm a bit of a Pollyanna kind of guy. I rarely get depressed or unhappy. So and I'm really annoyed at that, because I'd rather be depressed and unhappy than be happy, because I know happiness it seems fake. It doesn't seem genuine or real, so to speak. Not real in the Lacanian sense, but you know what I mean. And what I'm trying to understand is, I'll put it this way. It's sort of like, you know how when Zizek and Lacan talks about Galileo, épée c'est moi, and yet it moves, where this idea that, the things, the fact that there's still a drive, the fact that human beings still do things. There's still it. I mean, you look at the world. Of course, if you look at the world generally, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of pain, wars, just unspeakable amounts of evil, so to speak. But at the same time, there's also positivity, which at least on the surface, it looks something. It looks like joy or happiness. People are having fun. I live here in Melbourne. It's a relatively safe country. In Australia, I mean, people are going out and they've got smiles on their face. So all of this, it's there, but at the same time, it just seems like a facade to me. It just seems like a complete joke to me, which is why even within myself, I don't like the fact that I'm generally a pretty happy person. So how do you, well, I'm sorry, I'm being a bit long-winded here, but how do you explain the fact that there is some positivity that emerges out of this, let's call, ontological negativity or ontological living depth of subjectivity, and not only the subject as an individual, but even, as you mentioned, within our social reality? How do you explain the positivity?
Well, I would use Kierkegaard here. It's just seeing it as a form of despair, because it's just the opposite perspective, which both perspectives are applicable to describe what is happening outside. People who look like they're enjoying. The conventional perspective would be that you have to be happy, like it's the natural, desirable state. And once you're depressed, it's the deviation. You need to fix it. It's a disease or something like that. That's when one considers despair, melancholy, all the negative things as the deviation that in need of treatment, which presupposes the ideal of a human being that you can be happy all the time. And my view would rather, I would suggest relying on Kierkegaard, seeing happiness as just one of the forms of despair, the tolerable despair, or just some rest of despair, but the formulation within the space of despair, because with the assumption that everything is despair, it's like easy. And it's also a life hack how to tolerate people, like how not how to tolerate their happiness. It's and one of my patients actually told me that after a certain traumatic moment, he started to see happy people on like parties and happy occasions. It occurred to them that they are going to die. So he literally saw them as living dead already. And if you think of trauma as conventionally as inadequate comprehension of reality, I think it's adequate. It is. You just see it too vividly. You cannot get rid of this comprehension. You cannot relate to it. So I would just suggest more depressive perspective, that is the certain form of despair that is tolerable, or the relief of despair, but still I would consider it in the space of despair. Other people, I'm not claiming that it's a correct comprehension. It's just something that is
Yeah.
um, something that one can employ as alternative if one wants to.
Yeah, in fact, I want to ask you about love, but what you just mentioned there, you're not claiming it's the correct comprehension. Eh, Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Because you did mention this in most of your interviews, that you're not, like prescribing, or you're not saying this is how things are. It seems like, at least from my, let's say, superficial understanding, what you're trying to get at, it's not even something you can put words to. So when you say something like, you're not saying that this negative philosophy is the correct comprehension of reality. What do you really mean by that, Dr. Rish?
Well, it's before maybe when I was interested in philosophy in a more conventional way. Well, first it was genuine interest about the just it's interesting, like everything else, which is too boring to just leave,
I
do
agree.
it. But then there is the sphere when you philosopher, when you try to do it, or psychoanalyst, it's like the intellectual sphere. When you what you do, especially to make living, you need to be someone established, and you need to compete with other people on saying something smart, useful, or so being smart. And just when you're depressed, and I was depressed, and I just got used to it, but it just doesn't make sense. It's just, what are we doing? And I feel it as a form of despair, very academia itself. You're like escaping into something, holding on to those um, recognition, something. And if you are kind of outside of it because you're not able to be inside, fully relate to it because of depression, for example, it's just silly. And it's not from a position of superiority. Like, position of depression is also silly. Like, they're both stupid. So I don't have, not able to relate to it. I don't have intention to open up some truth about the world. Um, I think it's out of when we're scared and we want to be someone, be loved in a certain way, or uh, respected, and be better than someone, say something more smart. I'm not able to, like, I don't want to do it anymore. It just maybe because I'm not able to, but also because I don't want to that much. But what else is there to do in philosophy if if not this competition and clarification and being better, smarter than someone else? So what I do, I just, another meme. It's just, what do you do for a living? I suffer. um, or I glitch. There is like nothing. I just talk about my depression and how what my depression is telling me, which is kind of depersonalizing, strange thing. I don't know why I'm doing this. It might, like you would claim that it gives you comfort. Okay, that's your problem, you know.
Yeah, I feel
But
like by
I
me
don't have
saying
this
that,
need.
I offended you by me saying your book gives me comfort. That's
I
like an attack
forgive
on
you.
you. Yeah, sorry for the interruption, but you were saying, Dr. Rish, I interrupted you there.
Yeah, it's just that I don't have this goal anymore. I don't think I even have a goal. Um, just doing something. I feel that I still, like, there's things that I care about, and strangely, like you said, with depression, it feels like it's more genuine. And it's the obviously dangerous perspective, but what can you do if you cannot get rid of it? You cannot come back to the perspective where it's not genuine. I think you would pretend. So it's the depression operating on me, and me writing something. Other interesting perspective is Zizek comprehension of the writing books as a form of suicide. Well, for him, it's the extension of a suicide. Like, I will write one book and then commit suicide, and then he's writing until now. He looks fine. He's not, but he's fine. Like, this is form of the suicide, this kind of form, just doing something. Not that much because you're motivated to do it. Rather, uh, maybe mm, rather there I care for something still, and I'm holding on to this, to the depression, which I traumatic worldview, which I find important to uh, guard, something like, which I know is stupid, but that's the only thing it actually strangely, not that it keeps me alive, but I'm dying into it, and committing suicide through being devoted to it, and not that much. And writing a book is a part of this devotion, and that's it. And then one day it will just end. That's my next project.
Yeah, in fact, I believe that even before I read your work, but now I'm certain of it that all of life is essentially a prolonged suicide. It just even logically that makes sense to me. That's that you know it's interesting. I see like a lot of these self-help people obsessively like they talk about like discipline and motivation and like getting what you got to do. But for me, all of that is kind of just prolonging your gradual suicide. And then I don't even say that in a whatsoever like a supercilious patronizing way. It's rather that's what we all are doing, trying to just before we in fact let me ask you this before I go on another monologue, Dr. Reach, but to put it plainly, what is your philosophy of suicide? What, like, given your negative philosophy, how do you view the act of suicide?
Yeah, I think I was criticizing as too positive, because it is on one hand too positive. Like you need a hell lot of motivation to do something, because you need minimum at least planning and skills. It involves a lot. Who the hell has all the motivation now enough? um, and maybe also the need to end pain, which is also kind of form of salvation to minimize pain. So there are positive aspects to it, and there is also a joke which is inappropriate maybe, uh, but the less people who are suicidal, the more people who are suicidal, the less people who are suicidal. Like there is this strange absurdity, positivity into the very suicide. So life itself is not the opposite of a suicide. It's maybe betraying. The actual suicide is betraying of the suicide that life is, just ending it, which I fully understand. But still, there is a positivity to it. There is a positivity to life and extending suicide. Just leave your life, understood as the extended suicide. And there is its own positivity to so the act of suicide. The one is arresting the other, but on the other hand, extended suicide is also quite positive. Why would you extend it if you can just end it? So we stuck in the impossibility to be fully negative, because the suicide won't end it, as well as just living life, also approaching your death naturally, one could say, wouldn't end it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I take side with Byung-Chul Han, who in some of his work he mentioned suicide is more of a result of excess positivity rather than negativity. And especially like in his sociological work, he says that in his book The Burnout Society, he talks about yes, suicide is in some sense where the ego burns out from excess positivity, from this imperative in like the Lacanian sense of superego imperative to enjoy in that sense. On the note, this probably is a good segue. I want to ask you, because when I emailed you initially, I wanted to talk to you about Byung-Chul Han's work, given I saw so many similarities, especially in the fact that while you are a psychoanalytical theorist, you still theorize more on the social sphere, and I find that's what Byung-Chul Han does too. So, firstly, are you familiar with any of his work? Have you read any of Byung-Chul Han's work in any deep
Yeah,
sense?
a little bit the burnout society. And I still would see myself as different, my perspective, because the way I see him is extending the motive of critical psychology, critical theory, comprehension of positivity, positive society as something that is totalitarian, was Zizek represents, was criticizing the injunction to enjoy. And Zizek also belongs to the critical theory school. So the criticizing society as maybe late capitalism society, as obsessed with happiness, with positivity, and critical theorists would contrast to it, which Adorno and other critical theorists would call happy consciousness, meaning uncritical consciousness. And they would contrast to it the need to cherish negative consciousness or critical consciousness more, instead of just trying to be happy, follow the injunction to enjoy. But for me, it's still very positive, like this very criticism of positivity, because it's still in the name of more healthy society and meaning more happy society. Like it's still trying to save, aiming at salvation, just pointing what are the problems, how society is sick. And with Adorno, this is the term that he would use: society is sick, and this sickness is demonstrated in the pursuit of excessive pursuit of happiness, something like it. But the very idea that you are someone who is saving society, who is showing how society is sick, trying to improve it. So this is where I would diverge from this perspective, because they're still positive with this, leading somewhere to kind of salvation, maybe making society more healthy. And I'm not, like, for me, it's quite similar, mirroring the trying to make individual happy, forcing them to be happy, or trying to make society more happy. For me, it's like it's not the step into the direction of not aiming at salvation. It's still too positive. It's still not depressive enough for me. And I understand the logic of this kind of criticism, but not. I wouldn't share the very perspective, the base from which it is accomplished, this kind of criticism. So I would criticize, maybe not criticize it, but notice it. But I wouldn't say that this is what one needs to do now in order to arrive to the brighter future. I'm not interested in the brighter future. I don't believe in it.
Yeah. So, Dr. Resh, if I'm gonna ask you another crass question. Let's say in this share was one of these, like, self-help, Tony Robbins, I don't know, all these self-help people who are like into self-improvement and self-development. If they came in, kind of challenged you and said, but no, I did all these things. I started, I don't know, exercising, or I started building good habits, and my life has got better. I'm happy. There's like a I don't know. They would probably challenge your philosophy by saying that there's like goodness to my life. There's like there's like a very utilitarian, let's say, mindset of saying you do action A and the outcome would be pleasure, so on and so on. How, as in, for a person who doesn't, let's say, subscribe to the kind of the worldview that even I share, the idea of like depressive realism, how would you articulate your philosophy to a person like that? And not that I know you'd say that you don't have to, like, just live your own life. I don't care, but not in that sense. But let's say, devil's advocate, if someone were to kind of challenge you on that, how would you articulate that philosophy?
Yeah, you think people don't challenge me? They do, just trying to escape from the conversation. But and it's true, escaping or not engaging with people who have this kind of perspective is actually reasonable. It's not because I'm scared that much. I'm not, but it's just not appropriate to, because they approach me from the perspective if I'm right, right? If I have to prove it, and I'm not interested. I'm not interested in if I'm right, and I'm not interested in proving rationally my conception, because I'm quite self-critical too. Like, why the hell am I thinking that way? I mean, I'm the worst critic of myself. But nonetheless, I feel important to protect it, precisely because of partially because of this. Like, it's quite easy to challenge it, to destroy it, and maybe something that is easy to destroy needs to be cherished, something like it. But it also depends what kind of who you're talking to, And with the book is also, it's not a book for everyone, and it doesn't mean that only for the best one. Like, it's completely different. I think one would read it in completely different way if they are depressed, like in the moment of being in touch with depression, I would say, and when they're more different state, if there is a like different form of despair. And I would see my role as the, mourners in Ukraine and in Ireland. They have tradition of inviting women to funeral who would cry and sing certain sad songs, and that's it. Like, it's psychologists would probably see the value of these women who are invited to be sad and to cry. That someone who died would never come back, and this is the song. Like, it doesn't give a hope. Psychologists would find a use of everything, including of that. Like, you need to channel. Help people to get in touch with their negative feelings so they can overcome it. But I prefer to see it as just no reason. It's just something that has to be done. Maybe it's not has to be done. It just, they have this function, and for some reason it's important. And you wouldn't invite those people with their, let's assume that the worldview they are elaborating, like their worldview, those more people who are crying, who are invited to cry, if they start to elaborate, the starting point of their general worldview would be this profession. Like, this is how they see it. There is a person, you need to die, the person you need to cry, and the person will never come back, and there it's your function to articulate it. You won't invite those people for weddings. Why? Like, their perspective is just not, it's not appropriate. I mean, you can, but like, it doesn't fit there, because the wedding is the different sphere with the different worldview that it embodies. Like, it's the people who cherish the ability to cry and who are professionals in crying and hopelessness. Just the, why would they prove their point to people on a wedding who are happy and who congratulate each other with the and wishing each other the great whatever? But in each life, there is a moment of loss, including loss of the husband, after that comes after wedding. Even if the husband is not lost, something is still lost. It's what we call love. First you're in love, and then this boring stuff, for example. Like, it's we're losing things. And once it starts to be too obvious, the loss, once we encounter it, this is the time to mourners to invite them and to join their perspective that they embody. It's not always like, it's easy to question why would they do it, because why would they do it? And the other way around, you wouldn't invite people who perform their function on weddings, entertaining people, believing to the funerals, and just with their injunction to be happy. It's going to be okay. You'll find better husband or something like that. It's like something is wrong in here. So it's not the universal correct perspective of a human being and the world and what we have to do that I'm trying to articulate, and that I would be ready to protect. It just, like, it's not about it, and it's not. Well, now in the world, it's quite the right time for expressing it, maybe, but not imposing it. It's not something you impose on people because they wouldn't listen. To just would think that you're insane, and maybe I am, but it just doesn't work like that. You don't impose it. You wait for people when they come to this perspective, like, feel the loss, be disillusioned, and maybe you can be there to share it with them for no reason.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, as good Lacanians, we gotta admit that we are all insane. There's no stable subject. Human subjectivity itself is kind of messed up. Now the reason I asked that question was, Dr. Reshe, I've been giving, because Byung Chul Han is a very concise, succinct writer. So I've been giving out kind of like the Bible to people, his book, Burnout Society, especially people who are kind of almost narcissistically obsessed with self-help. And a lot of their criticisms is that, well, yes, this person lays down all these very acute and in fact perhaps even true descriptions of society, of contemporary society. Nonetheless, my life has improved by doing all these, I don't know, going for a walk in the morning or doing all these things that they prescribe. And then I was thinking in my head, unfortunately, your book is quite expensive, but if I could get a cheaper copy, I would buy a few more copies and give out your book to people and see how they would respond to that. I was just
Experimenting with
uh,
it. I don't think they would like it.
yeah. Although I do want to give this. This is the other book. I think you wrote this for Everyday Analysis. There's an essay by
Mhm.
you. I do want to share that essay around too because I'm interested. Perhaps this is me rebelling against my nature. I'm interested in developing more of your negative philosophy, only because I don't like the happiness within myself. As in, I'm suspect of it. I put it that way, and I'd rather live in the negative realm. Anyway, sorry to talk about myself here. The the other question, and I don't know, and I know you don't like compliments, but I'm an evil guy, so I'm going to compliment you. My favorite theories of love, ever since I started reading philosophy, was Alan Bajot's, and then it was Todd McGovern's, and now I'd unequivocally say it's yours. The way you've articulated it in your book, it is. I don't even know where else to go from there. As in the way you've laid down the idea of love around like loss and this dying and negativity. But just again, I know you've spoken about this in a couple of places, but yeah, through your framework of, let's say, or worldview of depressive realism and negative philosophy, what is love?
Thank you. So love is comprehended in everything else from the negative perspective as the based on negativity, trauma, lack, and all of those. So love as traumatic, and at the same time impossible in its nature. Love as suicidal, as self-destructive, and the very connection between others, what structures the bond, the romantic bond, love relationship is the rupture uh, between us, which destroys us at the same time and creates the connection. So when you reach the core of love, it hurts and you die. Um, and maybe the other person also dies. And the healthy relationship was considered the healthy relationship in psychotherapeutic society. I think it's just concealing enough this painful, impossible core of love for us not to notice it. But I'm sure people know that healthy relationship, they're very boring and they don't feel like love. That's the problem. Like you can have it. It's not the problem to have healthy relationship. It's just super boring and it's not love. What we call love, unfortunately, just very cruel joke. It's the when you're dying into it, when it's you encounter the impossibility of it, and it's the only way to feel it, which is super uh, horrifying, especially for the Valentine's Day, the revelation. But the isolation also doesn't help. The other is the one who hurts, and we only feel them in a way. I think that they hurt us. The other is the one that hurts in us. The isolation would be also not the protection from it, maybe protection, but uh, also a certain type of social bond that also hurts the other hurt you. Constitute relation with them by isolating yourself from them, and being isolated, it's still the condition that hurts because you're isolated precisely. So you also feel the bond with the other through pain. And with the attachment theory, which gives the hope of healthy relationship, of healthy attachment type, I think that which presupposes like we hope that the healthy one doesn't hurt. It's the best one, and I think that it hurts, but when you just reduce it, conceal it enough, uh, the pain, when it starts to be boring, then it just possible to bearable, right? But it just doesn't feel that there is a connection anymore. It's precisely bearable because it's not the attachment that much. It's concealed.
Yeah. So Peter Rollins, I didn't mention him too. He too really influenced my thinking on the idea of love around loss. So for him, he articulates this quite well in the previous conversations we had. He said that which I love this. He says communion is building a community around a shared loss. Uh, and well, I'll just put it this way. What are your just intimations on that idea that, loving is kind of feeling this loss, ontological loss within us, and yeah, does that sit along with your philosophy too, or would you radicalize that even further?
Yeah, Peter Rowling distinguishes, which is great, between community and communion.
Yes.
Community would be more a conventional way of people getting together because they share something, like they share enemies or certain goal, a certain identification. They have something in common, and he doesn't like it, and he suggests what he creates is communion, when people share nothing, loss, luck, and this would be authentic relation. I would radicalize it. I think in a way that it's like it presents itself as this is a proper way of how things supposed to be, and I would think of was trying to think of a therapy as a communion. Uh, Instead of treatment, instead of fixing someone, instead of hierarchy of bringing to certain healthier condition or improvement, like the communion, sharing nothing. There still has hope to it that this is a happy thing. This the way it's supposed to be. If one thinks about love in these terms, it gives a hope that there is a way how to what we have to do, and that it brings harmony. Something that there is a luck, and we need to connect through this luck, and then it's going to be authentic, equalized with a harmonious, happy relationship. Uh, to be honest, I don't think there is happy, like this is harmonious relationship. I think it's also one of the ways, one of the illusions how we would like to hope that it exists, but it doesn't. And still talking about how it should be done, it's still trying. We are connecting, I think, ontologically through it. There is no other ways to connect. It's not what we have to do. It's like it's maybe comforting illusion in a way. It's like training a cat who are impossible to train to sit, for example, and telling the cat to sit when the cat is already sitting. It starts to sit. You tell sit, and you have illusion that the cat obeys, where it's just your operation upon the cat to comfort you. This similar thing with what we have to do with love. To it's already there, uh, in a horrifying way. There is nothing you can do or you have to do to make it better or to do it properly. It's not a problem. It's just different comprehension, maybe. Either you discuss love and trying to um, figure out the correct form of love that would bring happiness, won't hurt anyone, or like hurt less, or you're just horrified of love. That's what I'm rather am. Like its presence, in inevitable nature, and a horror of it, without trying to anymore escaping into how to fix something or what's the correct form of attachment. just I'm horrified without escaping from it. And I'm not saying that this is how the proper way to think about it, just a certain state of my existence.
Yeah, I do like what Zizek says. I think in one of it's probably in a documentary, in one of the Pervert's Guides documentaries, he says that, love is a disaster, it's a catastrophe. But then there's also when I'm not in love, I'm sad. So it's like, whereas you're saying both when you're in love and not in love, you're going to be sad. You're going to be sad regardless. Just face the catastrophe, so to speak.
Yeah, so I think that and Kierkegaard, one who knew that you get married and you don't get married, you regret.
Either
It's
or, yeah. Yeah.
we have a hope for being saved. Simone de Beauvoir talks about women who treat man as the form of salvation, the most immediate one. When you're alone, you expecting for man to save you, and once you're disillusioned once you're in a relationship, because you're in a relationship but no one is saving you. Like, you encounter the horror of being in a relationship, being disillusioned in this salvation. It's not heaven. It didn't work. So once you are not in a relationship, you expect to get rid of the horror of being alone while you're in a relationship, and in relationship the other way around, you expect to be saved of the horror of relationship by ending a relationship or proceeding to find someone else better, something like it. But it's the horror every time. It just, for a while you remember the previous horror, the previous type of horror, and you think that this is improvement. It helps you to hold on for a while. Then you forget about it. It's like encounter horror of this situation of relationship, for example, and then you're hoping for opposite salvation in the end of relationship. It just never comes. So it's both horror of when we are in relationship, we get rest from the previous type of horror, and then it's the dialectics forever, or you just get adapted to a certain type of horror, being alone or being with someone, the tolerable horror, and you settle because this is the horror that you prefer, maybe.
Yeah, certainly. All right, Dr. Reach, I have a few questions now on your work with kind of your writing on Todd McGavin. I know that he deeply influenced your work, because I guess love is a good segue to this too. Essentially, Zizek talks about in a couple of the interviews. He's asked, and he puts it in his typical Zizekian way. He says, "Oh, look," so he recalls a story of when he was giving a public lecture, and in the Q&A session, he was asked by a person, "Look, you're an old guy. You're gonna die soon, but you're telling us young people that life is everything's hopeless, catastrophe is coming." His analogy, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's an oncoming train. Everything is coming to an end, ecological disaster, economic crisis, so on and so on. But then the person asks from Zizek, well, no, you're gonna die soon. You can say all these things, but what about us young people? We have to live, and then live this burdensome, shitty life for the next 50, 60, who knows, even 70 years. And then we need to formulate a society around this. We need to be ethical subjects. We need to have a politics. We need to make, even personal decisions like, oh, are we going to have kids? So all these kinds of things that people think about. So let me ask you that question. But I'm not calling you old. I'm not in that sense at all. What I mean is in the sense of, well, yes, I know you're not in the business of giving advice, but how would a society, what would the ethics of your philosophy look like?
You're right that it's different. The people in different age, I think, tend to comprehend, and their ability to relate to it, it's different. Like, you first don't want to, and you still hope that it's not true, and then you kind of give up, and I'm closer to death, to
No, no,
comparison to
I
you.
didn't mean that. I'm sorry, Dr. Reach. I'm just saying I was paraphrasing just like that. Yeah, but anyway.
Well, it's interesting because I think I'm closer with Foucault. idea of pessimistic activism. Like you still have to do it because you're doing something, but knowing that you're going to fail, maybe like in this contradiction, you're doing it, and it's appears to me as genuine because it's like taking care of each other. It's useless, but actually doing it is when you it's useless because we are going to die, because every day is approaching our death, being closer to our death, no matter how hard we are taken care of. That's the tragedy of human relationships. So doing something, but still understanding, not understanding, but that it won't bring final salvation, like any solved problem in the social order or something like this will bring its new problem. Like the feminism, for example, was it solves the problem, but it brings so much more new problems. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything, because not doing anything is also doing, and it's also quite active position. So just that's it. Just doing something, but in a pessimistic way, not expecting. And it feels to me like genuine, because if you do something in order to arrive to salvation, to solve all the problems, you're not actually doing it. If there is no paradox to it, this paradox of trying to improve things and failing. If you're trying to improve things and failing, doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. It just means that you should try and fail. That's it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree there, Dr. Rich, especially because I love when, going back to Jack again, he says the most authentic act of romantic love in this case, in gift giving, would be to give a useless gift. It's not to give like a utilitarian gift, but rather like some flowers or something stupid that you can never really use for any like fulfill any material needs. And for me, in the more I come to think of it, especially now after being radicalized by your work, so to speak, I've realized I'm still gonna live a useless life. But I'm sorry again, you're gonna find this really insulting. By living a useless life, I find myself being quite happy, in fact, quite edified. By like this podcast, it's useless. I don't even know why I'm doing it, but I find it much more edifying than, I don't know, investing in the stock market for some gains or something like that. But no, I find that quite interesting. So then getting back more to the political domain. Now, I did reread that chapter where you talk about because as you outlined beautifully in that chapter, Todd McGovern, he takes the death drive and he brings it to the social sphere, like away from kind of the psychoanalytical subject. Firstly, could you probably spend a few minutes, because we still do have we have about 20 minutes left in terms of time, just explaining how Todd McGovern did that in his work by bringing it to the social sphere, but also then connecting it more to your philosophy as to, if you could imagine kind of a political project from negative philosophy, what would that look like? I mean, I know, philosophers aren't always in the job of, coming up with ideas in the sense of like, oh, this is what society should look like, but just to us speculate if that's okay.
What Todd McGovern does with the death drive is that he makes it a social drive. And for me, this is more coming back to Sabine Spirin, which Todd McGovern didn't know about. So he starts with Freud, and Freud's individualized death drive, and extends it to see it as the drive that constitutes social bond, not only individual. And it was initially formulated that way in Sabine Spirin, something that is social. But Sabine Spirin never talked about politics. And for McGovern, he talks about death drive as constitutive to individual and plus social bond, meaning also to politics, to political dimension. And he tries to accomplish impossible thing, trying to think of a political social project of that would include death drive, that won't try to exclude death drive and political sphere, and he acknowledges that, and it's obvious that it's very problematic for negativity because the nature of it is it's positive. Like we cannot suggest any agenda as a politician, as the political party or something like that. Within the sphere of politics, you cannot offer something that is bad, not aimed at improvement. Like with conservative politics, they would, and with emancipatory politics, they quite coincide in the, even though they're completely different, because conservative politicians would encourage to come back into some kind of imaginary future and restore the, the imaginary past and restore the version in the past, whereas it was more authentic or correct, but it's still aimed in a future, improving future. And emancipatory politics is also aimed at improving future through eliminating some obstacles, like capitalism, for example, to arrive at improvement. So, and that's all. There is no other politics that wouldn't aim to, in a positive way, to improve anything. And psychology as a social project, psychotherapy is this kind of project that tries to improve health, mental health, something like it make people happier or healthier mentally. So it's quite hard to establish to think of even of political project that won't be positively oriented. And psychoanalysis for McGowan, and I would agree, allows small space for negativity, to see it as it has the ability to see the negativity, the death drive, as constitutive without trying to escape from it. Late Freud, except for all the developments of psychoanalysis as a part of political programs, like in Freudo-Marxist critical theory that takes Freud, it still would see death drive as something to eliminate, conceal, as an obstacle. It never includes it as the part of the political project. McGowan tries to do it, tries to think of the political project as negative, I would say, as not excluding the death drive, but not excluding, but including it based on it. For me, it's still very positive, his project, because the aim of what he talks is realistic pleasure. And he discusses how death drive is structural to the ability of us to feel pleasure, which at the same time includes suffering. Like we need suffering we need luck to feel the pleasure. And for me, the very framework is quite positive. If you're talking about pleasure, realistic pleasure, there is no negative move here except for just leave the framework. And the other thing, the important thing that McGowan is talking about is that even in all the most positive projects, social projects like religion or emancipatory politics or psychotherapy, there is still the core. It's death driven at the core. It's still this lack that that one shares, the nothingness at the core of it, the self-sabotage. That's how it functions. It pretends to be positive, but then it's aimed at its failure. And Heidegger is interested in the concept of being towards death. Is interesting to use it as a social, to describe a social phenomenon. Not only human existence is something that is self-sabotaging, approaching its death, and through approaching its annihilation death, it's actually extends it in time, exists in time. But actually, we can say it extends itself in time through actualization of the emptiness or its limit or nothingness that it is. And any social positive thing, any project can be seen as approaching its end, where it's going to fail, approaching its failure, failing to do what it's supposed to do. Like each human life and each society approaching its limit. And but So on one hand, it's already negative at its core. It just conceals itself as positive. We shouldn't worry that much, and trying to tell people not to be too positive or not to aim at something positive, because they're going to fail anyway. So it's not something that you have to do. It's there. There's nothing you have to do at the same time. And McGovern arrives at interesting paradoxical statements, like hopeless subject that's still functioning, but out of the loss of hope. This paradoxical nature, or some kind of comedy as a social project, and what constitutes a social bond. It's interesting because it's embracing failure, failing at the same time, like more genuinely, maybe exposing itself as a failure. So it's ever so slightly, just except for it's already there at the core. This death drive, the self-sabotage of social project, they're already negative. Just political project would mean any society is negative society already. On one hand, there is nothing you have to do except for, well, nothing. But on the other hand, maybe just more genuinely, the forms of social bond, project that would more genuinely articulate its paradoxical nature or the negative nature, like Peter Rolling's Communion, or the comedy in the way it's represented in psychoanalysis, embracing paradoxical side of existence, something like it, or the negative psychoanalysis as a practice. I would also consider it like negative, like everything else, but just more genuine in being negative. That's it. But it's not much better. It's not better.
Yeah. So would it be you take the Beckett mantra, what is it? Try again, fail again, fail better. You say try again, fail again, and just fail. No fail better, just fail. In that
Just fail
because
again.
okay, I can't help but try to imagine a world, outlined or through the framework of your philosophy, because something really, let's say, banal, I don't know, more universal healthcare. Like in Australia we have public healthcare, but let's say in the US now, the progressive, the leftist, they're trying to get a universal healthcare. And I guess the idea would be, okay, when we have universal healthcare, this is good. It'll help more people. And obviously me, I'm somewhat of a communist. I do support it. But then the question is, once we have universal healthcare, there'll be more paradoxes, there'll be more failures, there'll be more issues that they face. It's not like, in many ways, are you saying, despite the uselessness of this emancipatory project, nonetheless, just engage in it as a hopeless subject?
Yeah, maybe. That's what McGovern said, and I quite like it, because it's the same story with the cat. You're doing it anyway, just you feel better that
Yeah,
you're doing something.
yeah,
And yeah, we shouldn't worry that it won't, if it's a core of social bond, it's just going to manifest itself. It's just different ways to fail. This is what we can fail in with a better healthcare, or fail with worse healthcare. Different forms of failure, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't experiment
yeah,
with them. Like form of the failure that is patriarchal order, or failure that is feminist. I prefer the later one, but it also it's more interesting form of failure, human tragedy.
yeah. I think speaking of feminism, for me, the most patronizing thing is when people say, "Oh, the world would be a much better place without any wars if we had more female leaders," or something like that, which I find that so patronizing. For me, yeah, the world would probably, we need more female leaders, but not because the world would be better. It'll probably be
It
because
would be worse what you need to do.
worse, but regardless. Yeah, no, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Reish. Okay, last question. And I know you're not in the advice of, not in the business of giving advice, pardon me, but any artists, any poets, any comedians, whoever, or even authors, apart from the people we mentioned, that if people are interested in, exploring more this negative space of what you've outlined, apart from obviously reading your work, Are there any others you would recommend for people to follow or read or study or perhaps even experience?
I recently published this pamphlet on Munch, Edward Munch, which I see as quite negative, was his Scream, and funny and negative at the same time. But to be honest, it's people tend to do it to look for sources to explore. I would say don't. Maybe the opposite. Just stay within yourself, and this means I comprehend it as the void. Human being, genuinely being within yourself is approaching the void, and which is the source of all the poetry, maybe according to Christever, for example. Like it's there inside of you in a horrifying way. Well, poetry would be a way of escaping it already, but like you can consult the source of it, the void within you, instead of trying to see how other people confronted it. Like use their falling into their void. You can have your own. Just stay for quite a long time within you and fall into nowhere, which is traumatizing. I'm sorry, but
No, that's totally fine. I completely understand. In fact, I think I'm gonna call this podcast this podcast isn't recommended for anyone who hasn't lost hope. It's a podcast for hopeless people, this episode. But now on that note, Dr. Rish, I am very much appreciative of your time and I'm grateful for your work. So thank you very much.
thank you, Rahul. Thanks.